Alright, hello once again. This is Jeff Scott of Rankin Technical College, and I've been going over the PowerPoint presentations for Murachs, JavaScript, and jQuery 3rd edition. We are on Chapter 4 of 18, and as you can see on the screen here, Chapter 4 is on how to work with JavaScript objects, functions, and events. This is a fairly complex chapter considering where we've come so far. So we've got 1 applied objectives, and I think it's like 11 knowledge objectives. Our applied objective, as we're getting so far, given what we've learned so far, be able to code, test, and debug a JavaScript application. That's our 1 applied objective. Our knowledge objectives distinguish between the window object, document object, text box, number, date, and string objects. Describe the way number and string objects are created. Describe parse int and parse float. Describe get element by ID, write and write line. Describe the focus method and the disabled properties. Describe the toFixed method of a number object. Describe the way date objects are created. Describe the date object to date string, get full year, get date, and get month methods. Describe the length property of a string and several string methods, including index of, substring, substr, 2 lowercase and 2 uppercase. Describe the creation and use of both function expressions and function declarations. Distinguish between local and global variables. Describe the use of strict mode in JavaScript. And describe the creation and attachment of event handlers, including an event handler for the load event of the window object. So we have looked at several different things so far in here, and they talk about the confirm. Let's just get right to it. So is that one of our script files here? That was the scores file. Here is one of our index files. I'll just leave it there. Alright, there we have the miles per gallon. We've got the stuff in there. Alright, let's see. We've done the prompt statement. You've seen this before, so if I go and run this program, there's the prompt. So enter miles driven, enter gallons used, and it shows you the miles per gallon. Nothing new there. And you want to continue. Oh, and I said yes. So if we come back into our program here and we say, we use a confirm statement, which is what I want to show you from right here. Alright, so let's see. I think they show you a confirm in the book. Do I know how to use it? Yes, but I want to make sure I'm giving you the right syntax. So if we said something like this, let's see. Here we ask if you want to repeat. In other words, do you want to do it again? So I'm going to come in here and I'm going to say, confirm. Are you sure you want to end this program now? Alright, so let's save that, run the program. We'll just put in no. See that? Are you sure you want to end this program now? If you click OK, it'll end. If you click close, if you click here, I'm still in it. Now I'd have to go and refresh the screen, but if I put this in, so I'm repeat entries, no. Are you sure you want to end this program now? Okay, I'm going. Alright, that wasn't a great usage of this. The confirm displays a dialog box that contains the string in the parameter and an OK button and a cancel button. If you click OK, true is assumed. If you click false, cancel, false is assumed. So typically when you do that, you associate code with it. All right, gives me a good chance to show you that if you say, well, that's fine, Jeff, but I don't think I really learned a lot right there. Well, then you go over to, and you know, I'm just going to put in here JavaScript confirm. All right, and you'll notice almost always one of the first things that comes up is W3 schools. And there's an example, not a great one. Confirm, press a button. So try it, press a button. Yeah, I don't know, do they have anything in here where they, let's see. There we go. This is a little better one. All right, so here it tells you if you pressed true or if you pressed false. So notice if I call this and I click here, it says you press cancel. If I run it again and I click here, it says you pressed OK. So what you could do is you could have the code go on or not go on based upon which of those two buttons the user pressed. Okay, I think that's enough talking about that. So the parse int and the parse float we've seen. Again, let's take a look at another, or look at gallons was a parse float. So what we're doing right there is we're entering a number of gallons that are used. Then we're attempting to parse that number. So what you enter into a prompt dialog is a string. We're attempting to convert that string into a float and store it back into itself. If we put something on numeric here, we're handling it. Okay? So when you do this and you run the program and you put something in there, JavaScript is a little quirky like this compared to most other languages. What do I mean? Well, what I mean is, if I go and run this program, all right, and ask for miles driven, I can put in 456 hello, and it takes it. 100 gallons of gas used, 23 goodbye. And you see that it works. However, if I do it again and I put hello 456 and goodbye 23, it doesn't work. All right? So what I'm saying is the way that this does work is it'll keep going until you put in something non-numeric here. Numeric, this is fine. Notice that's not fine. That's not a valid number. But it'll probably take it, I'm thinking, and then it'll just cut off this part. Let's see. And you see that it did. So again, as I mentioned, kind of quirky in that respect. Well, there was a confirm example right there. There's some prompts. There's some parsing. Okay? All right, methods of the document object. Now we're starting to get into the heavier stuff, so to speak. The get element by ID gets the HTML element with the ID passed into it, and it returns that element. Write and write line both write things right onto the web page itself. Write keeps you on the line. You know, it writes something and it keeps you on that line. Write line writes a string out and then moves you down to the next line. Now, here's an example. So what we're doing here is we're saying what I want you to do is I want you to grab the element in on our web page that has an ID of rate. And I want you to take that element, whatever value it has, I want you to copy it over into rate box. Okay, it's just an example right there. There's a lot of uses for this, and as we go on, we're going to be using this. We're going to use this method as much, if not more, than any other. And please notice the caseness. They're using true camel case. Get is lowercase, element has an uppercase E, by has an uppercase B, and ID has an uppercase I. All right, some terms you should be familiar with. The window object. All right, I don't think there's really anything exactly new right here. All right, we mentioned that the window object is the default object, so you can say window.alert. All right, and you can say just alert also. We've got a global object that we're going to get to in a bit, a document object, which is part of a subset of the window object, and not a number, nan. Before we go on, I just want to show you this. It gets a little confusing because we're going to work with two things. One that's called the BOM, the Browser Object Model. And that's right here. A little hard to see, but I guess that's as big as I can make it. So under the window, we've got the history object, the frames object, the location object, the document object, the navigator object, and the screen object. Under the document object, we've got the anchors object, the forms object, the images object, the links object, and the location object. All this stuff collectively is referred to as the BOM, or the Browser Object Model. That's as opposed to what's called the DOM, or the Document Object Model. The DOM is going to look different. Here's an example of a DOM right here. When every time you create a web page, a document object model or a DOM is created for that page. I believe it's either Chapter 5 or Chapter 6. Not 5. It's Chapter 6 when we get in there in a little bit that we're going to be talking about using the document object model. So these are all things that you're going to be introduced to, and they'll be reinforced again and again and again throughout the book. All right. Things that you can do with a text box. If you give something the focus, that means that the mouse or the cursor will be put into that field. All right. If you take a text box and you give it a value, then text will appear in the text box. If you take a text box and you disable it by setting the disabled property to true, you won't be able to enter anything into the text box. All right. If you go and let's go back. I don't know if this will work or not, but I'm going to try something here, and that is I'm going to go back to our gas program here, and we're going to run it. And I'm going to put in a kind of goofy number, 345.6789 divided by 12.34. Okay? Well, you'll notice it's giving us whole numbers here. What if I didn't want that? What if I wanted this thing to go to 2 decimal places? What if I wanted that? All right? Then I'm doing the int on miles per gallon. Okay? I'm going to leave off the parse int for now, just so you can see what it looks like. So I'll comment that line out. Run the program again. 345.67 divided by 12.345. And you notice now it's to many decimal places. Well, I don't like that. I want it to be to 2 decimal places. So how do I do that? And the answer is, what I do is I come through here, and when I print this out, I say mpg dot toFixed 2. Okay? So let's run that again and give it kind of goofy numbers like we just, like we just did. Yeah, I don't want that. So 345.6789 divided by 12.1111. And hopefully you notice here I've got the answer to 2 decimal places, 28.54. So the toFixed returns a string representation of a number after it's been rounded to a certain number of decimal places. Here's how you can define text boxes. Type equal text. You should always give them any field on a web page that you might conceivably want. Any field that you might conceivably want to be able to manipulate programmatically, you should give an ID to. So you can use the get element by ID with it. All right. Here is going and using the value property over 2 lines. which is totally fine. But notice here we're doing a dot something else. That's referred to as chaining. Results in a little less typing, and to a lot of people it makes more sense. Again, I've said this to you before, when you're first semester students, you should be programming for understandability. So if it makes more sense to you to do it the first way, do it the first way. If it makes more sense to do it the second way, do it the second way. All right, here's some more examples of chaining and not chaining. All right, now the author comes in next and talks about how to create a JavaScript object. Now I'm going to go and leave script here for a minute and tell you, if I was the one writing this book, I would not introduce a concept as complex as object-oriented programming in Chapter 4 of an 18-chapter book. But it's not my book, so we're going to go over it. It's fairly soft touch because what the author is saying here is we're creating a brand new object. This is not a new int, this is not a new number or a new Boolean, etc. This is an object. This is what's called a new date. All right? So if I come through there, I'm going to do that var today equal new date. So I'm going to start at the beginning here, and I'm going to say this. Var today equal new date. And then I'm going to say alert. I'm not going to put that in there. I'm just going to say today. And let's see what that gives us. All right, see that? Tuesday, January 23rd, 2018, 6:18 a.m., etc. And it's got Greenwich Mean Time, Central Standard Time, etc. Then it's going to go through the rest of the program. But what you get out of using something like a date object is you get to use the different methods that go along with the date object. Now, these are not a full list, but I can now do this. In fact, let's go ahead and do it. We just did that today equal new date. Let's do an alert on each one of these. All right, I'm going to have several alerts in a row, so it's going to look a little weird compared to some of the stuff that we've done so far, but that's fine. That's how we learn. So we should get first an alert box that prints out everything. Then we should get another alert box that prints out, I think, just the date, then just the year, then the date, then the month. I'm not sure exactly with all these what we're going to get, so let's take a look. So there's our first, there's our second, our third, our fourth, our fifth, okay, and then it goes into our program. Now, you may or may not have noticed that the last thing that printed in there was 0, and that was for the month. And that's because by default, the months go from 0 to 11. Now you can change that, all right, but that's the way that it works by default. All right, we've got several different objects that we can use in in JavaScript. I just showed you the date object. There's also a string object, and when you work with the string object also has many different methods that you can use. This will allow me to come over and show you yet another site. So I've already shown you W3 Schools. All right, and I can go to W3 Schools, and in much the same way, I can type in JavaScript date object. And you'll notice, again, one of the first things that's going to come up will be W3 Schools. But another one that comes up is developer.mozilla.org. And that's the Mozilla site. And a little hard to see. But this has all of the different date things that we can use. See that? And it'll have examples of all of them too. Now, if I change this from date to string, now it has over here all of the different string methods, etc. that I can use. All right. So again, I just want to make sure that you see this. I'm going to go put this up. Paste that in here. All right. Little ugly. But this is the website right here. For some reason, it's not allowing me to make this bigger. But that's it. https://developer.mozilla.org. My guess is if you just go out to developer.mozilla.org, it'll probably get you on your way going over there. So let's look. And you can see that it does. From there, you'd want to go to references and guides. And you can look over here. They'll have somewhere over here, they'll have JavaScript, etc. And you can go and take a look from there. All right, I can go to references. Let's see, tutorials. I don't know. There's HTML, CSS, JavaScript. A terrific place to go to start getting information to bring you on your road to becoming a web developer. All right. So there are a boatload of examples in here using the string object. All right. You'll notice that 2 uppercase would make this whole thing uppercase. 2 lowercase, of course, would make the whole thing lowercase. Sub-str and substring allow you to search a string for another string inside of it, also known as a substring. And index of can be used to show you where something begins, and length shows you the length. So 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11, 12. So the length is 12. Now when you go and actually start going through this, you actually start with 0. So there are 12 things in here, but they're actually 0, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11. So this is some of the stuff we've just looked at in here. The window object, we didn't really go over the global object yet. We will. The document object, not a number. Very quick little primer to the text box. With the number, we looked at the parse float and the parse int. We looked at chaining, the date object, and the string object. So let's jump into functions. There are 2 major types of functions that you can write. JavaScript, like some other languages, but really not like a lot of languages, gives you a lot of power that you can use with functions. All right. The reason that I'm bringing this up to you, and I'm bringing it up to you like this, is I want you to realize that there are 2 different types of functions you can write. You can write either what are referred to as anonymous functions. That's what this is, because this function does not have a name after it. Or you can write named functions. So what we're doing right here is we're writing a function that's anonymous because it doesn't have a name. It'll create a date object, and it'll give us an alert that says the year is, and it'll say, for example, now it'll say 2018. And then it takes that function and it puts the function itself into a variable. And we call the function by giving the variable's name with a set of parentheses. All right? Typically, if you're going to have a function that you're not going to be calling repeatedly, in other words, it's a one and done type of thing, you'll use this kind of syntax where you'll use an anonymous function. This is the one that's used the most often, right here. I call this an alias function. I've seen it with different names. This is an anonymous function because there's no name after the function. Whatever ID you pass in, what it does is it replaces you having to type in document.getElementById with some kind of an ID with just a $sign. So if we didn't do this, right here, we'd have to say var email address 1 equal document.getElementById, then in the parentheses, email address 1 dot value. So it's an alias, and it allows you to do a lot less typing, and it's typically with most, shouldn't even say most, but with many JavaScript programmers, it's going to be one of the first functions, if not the first function in their programs. Here is another anonymous function, which allows us to pass in a subtotal and a tax rate and return what the tax will be on something. So right here, our subtotal is $85, our tax rate is 5, so our total tax, our sales tax, it looks like would be $4.25. Now, that's an anonymous or an unnamed function. You can also create named functions. Here's an example of a named function. What's an advantage of creating a named function versus an anonymous? A named function can be called over and over and over again. It has a name associated with it. This named function does not return any kind of value. There's no return statement in there. We don't have to put in the word void as you do with some other programming languages. And here you don't need to do that. All right. Again, another anonymous function. There are just so many ways that you can do this. So previously we saw that calculate tax, and that was done as an anonymous function. Here we see it as a named function. It looks very similar, but instead of taking the function name and putting it into a variable, we call the function name and put the results into a different variable. All right. Again, that was just a beginning. We're going to talk much more about functions, calling or invoking functions, function expressions, which are those anonymous functions that we just looked at, function declaration, which are the named ones we just looked at, parameters or arguments, which are those things in parens that we pass to functions, returning something from a function, and also hoisted. And a function declaration is hoisted to the top of the scope that contains it. And what this means is it doesn't have to be coded. You can code the function before you code the variables that use it. Not all languages allow you to do that. All right. In this example, what you see in this line right here is we're creating a function. Inside of that function, we're creating a variable. We got a var on the outside, so we're taking our whole function here and assigning it to that variable. But we also have a variable in here. That variable that's in here is local to this function. In other words, it begins life here, it ends life right there. If we try to use it outside of the function in which it's been declared, we get an error. So its scope, that's the way we refer to it, its scope is local. On the other hand, if we declare a variable outside of any function, then we can use it and refer to it outside of the function. When you create a new variable, if you forget to use the word var, even if you do it inside of a function, it now becomes a global variable. That's bad practice, and it's something that we should never do. And one way to keep from doing that, one way to keep from getting bad habits, is to put at the top of your JavaScript file, double quote, use strict, double quote, with a semicolon. What that does is it forces the JavaScript interpreter to be much more strict in the way it looks at things. So we looked at that here and we said, if you accidentally leave the word var off inside of a function, then the variable that you don't put var on automatically becomes global, so it can be used outside of a function. But if you put use strict at the top and you try to do that, it doesn't allow you to. So using use strict at the top of your program forces you to become a better programmer. The other thing is JavaScript is very liberal. It lets you break a lot of rules that most other programming languages do not allow you to break. So by using the use strict, it forces you into becoming a better programmer from the get-go. Some best coding practices: use local variables whenever possible. You don't want global variables like we saw here. Global variables can cause side effects, which means that anything in the program can change the variable. That may be what you want, but chances are really good it's not. Use the var keyword when you declare all variables, whether they're global or local. Use strict mode always. Declare the variables for a function at the beginning of the function. So we just looked a little bit at scope, local variables, local scope, global variables, global scope, and strict mode. Now I'm already at 30 minutes, so I don't normally do this, but I'm going to break this presentation up into two, so I'll be back with part 2 momentarily.